Hello and welcome to this episode of Epochs, where I shall be talking all about the decline and fall of the Roman Republic. Now, let me take you to a moment in time. Just shy of 140 years before Christ, a young Roman aristocrat was making his way through Italy on his way to fight a war in Spain. And what he saw out of his carriage window set in train a series of events which were to define his life and career and ultimately lead to the end of the Roman Republic itself about 100 years later. What that young Roman aristocrat, just starting out on his career, saw was that where Italy should have been filled with small homesteads, small farms, it was in fact filled with giant farms held by just a small number of extremely rich people. And instead of working those farms were good, hard-working, honest Italian people, he saw foreign slaves. And what it meant was that the very fabric of Roman or Italian society was all out of whack, that there was something terribly wrong at the heart of Roman society. And it affected that young aristocrat very profoundly. And he went on after his military career to have a political career in Rome. And he tried to champion the causes of the downtrodden and the poor and the dispossessed. And I want to tell you his story, because his story is really one of the first, most important stories when it comes to the grand narrative of the fall of the Roman Republic. And that young aristocrat's name was Tiberius Gracchus. So when talking all about the life and career and achievements, or lack thereof, of Tiberius Gracchus, you'll be looking at Appian and Plutarch. I'm mainly going to be reading from Plutarch. So to begin the life of Tiberius Gracchus, the first thing you've got to say really is that he is extremely blue-blooded. He wasn't just a bit aristocratic, he was kind of as aristocratic as you could get, in a way. His father, another Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, had been a censor and a consul twice, i.e. the very, very pinnacle of Roman political life. His father had enjoyed 2 triumphs. Again, quite remarkable. It means you've really, really hit the absolute pinnacle of political achievement in Rome. His father was an extremely important person. And his mother was the daughter of Scipio Africanus, the Scipio Africanus. So on both sides of his family, sort of a great heritage, great lineage. And his mother Cornelia had in total had, I think, 12 children, but only 3 lived to adulthood. He had Tiberius himself, and he had 1 sister, and he had 1 younger brother, Gaius. That's terrible, isn't it? Such a high infant mortality rate in the ancient world. Unbelievably high, really. And Tiberius Gracchus' father had died when Tiberius was still quite young, and the whole estate was left to his mother. Now, she must have been an extremely formidable woman to raise such men as Gaius and Tiberius Gracchus. But also, we know that she just took control of the family and the estate and managed it extremely well. At one point, she turned down the offer of marriage from the king of Egypt. It was Ptolemy VI. He wanted to marry her, and she said, "No thanks, I'm happy to remain a widow in Rome." So extremely strong-willed. Must have been, as I say, a formidable woman. Now in Plutarch, his lives, the biographies he writes, are quite often comparisons. He might compare Julius Caesar and Alexander, for example. But in the case of the Gracchi brothers, he actually compares the 2 brothers with each other, whose political careers were about 9-10 years apart. Tiberius was about 9-10 years older, and thus their careers are separated by about the same distance. And he compares them together because in many ways they're very similar, and in other ways they're polar opposites to each other. And I'll talk, I think next episode of Epochs, I'll talk to you all about the career of Gaius Gracchus. But for this one, I just want to concentrate on Tiberius Gracchus. And we're told that he had lots of courage, physical, personal courage, self-discipline, generosity, eloquence and idealism. But when he spoke, and in his interpersonal dealings with people, he was very gentle and composed, and he spoke with decorum. which is very different to his brother Gaius, who's sort of very passionate and hot-blooded. And Tiberius's politics as well. We're told that they were the type of politics he liked to practice could be characterised as conciliatory, and that he liked to appeal to people's sort of sense of honour or pity. He didn't try and sort of browbeat people or bully people into seeing things his way. He tried to actually convince them or pull on their heartstrings. Again, different to his younger brother, which again I'll talk about next time. Plutarch talks of him as mild and reasonable, and that he was very brave in the face of the enemy, because as a lot of all Roman statesmen really in Republic days, before you could really start a political career in Rome, you had to have a military career, and Tiberius Gracchus did. And in the face of the enemy, apparently he showed bravery and resolve, and in his dealings with any sort of subjugated people, justice was first and foremost in his mind, apparently. He had a, quote, scrupulous attention to his public duties and a restraint in indulging in the various pleasures of life, whether that be the table or women's or games or whatever it was. He showed restraint. So, overall, he's supposed to have, a good, solid character, a good sort of virtuous character. There's not much that Plutarch finds to criticise him for. The only things he does say is that he was maybe a touch vain, not even really vain, just a little bit vain. Like he paid attention to fashion, how men would wear their hair, or the sort of the cut of their toga. Tiberius Gracchus liked to be quite fashionable, and there's nothing really wrong with that at all. It's not necessarily a vice at all. But if you were going to count it among the vices, Tiberius Gracchus was guilty of it in a very small sense. The other things is apparently he did like to spend money, again, a little bit, not massively. He didn't cover himself in gold and jewels and silver. Again, Plutarch says one story of that he bought some dolphins that were made of silver and that they were really expensive. That's like one of the only things Plutarch can think to criticise him for. So again, in the whole scheme of a life, it's really not that bad at all, is it? So where Tiberius Gracchus, as I said, came from a really important family. Both sides, maternal and paternal, of his family were extremely important, and that again, from the earliest age, was sort of singled out as having a good character. He was given a priesthood in the College of Augurs. There were only 9 augurs, a type of religious office, and he was enrolled into that. So people must have held him in high esteem, no matter sort of how good your family are and how sort of clean and good your personality is. If you don't kind of deserve one of those priesthoods, you probably wouldn't have got one in the 150s BC. You had to actually be worthy of it, at least a bit. Again, it speaks volumes about his character. And during his initiation ceremony for that priesthood, an extremely important man, Appius Claudius, offered him, Tiberius Gracchus, his daughter, Claudia, in marriage. Now, Appius Claudius, sort of the head of the Claudian household, and they really are the creme de la creme. They really are, you could argue, the preeminent family of middle to late Republican Rome. To be married into the Claudian family, you just couldn't marry any better than that. It's the highest level, really. And there's a nice anecdote that when Appius Claudius returned home that evening, he shouted to his own wife that, bring our daughter, bring Claudia down. I want to announce to her that I've betrothed her in marriage. She is now affianced. And his wife is supposed to have been a bit shocked and said, what's all the hurry? Why so suddenly? Unless you've got Tiberius Gracchus to marry her. And of course, that is the story. So once again, speaks volumes that even the Claudians were happy to have Tiberius Gracchus marry into their family. And so soon enough, Tiberius Gracchus keeps moving up the ladder, the cursus honorum, and becomes a military tribune. And a military tribune is quite a high rank in the Roman army. It's above any sort of centurion, but it's a low, sort of relatively starting rank for a member of the aristocracy who's being groomed to perhaps one day have a very high profile statesman level political and military career. So being a military tribune is both extremely important and a high rank, but also starting on the rungs of what would hopefully be an extremely eminent military career. So as military tribune, Tiberius Gracchus goes out and fights in the Third Punic War in North Africa, in Carthage. That's where Scipio Africanus the Younger, not to be confused with the Scipio Africanus, quite often instead of being called Scipio Africanus the Younger, he's called Scipio Aemilianus. He goes and fights under him. He's the commander, he's the CO on the ground. There's even a line that Plutarch tells us that Tiberius Gracchus scales a wall and goes over a wall first. It's not made explicitly clear whether it's the wall of Carthage during the final sack of Carthage. But here's what Plutarch tells us. He says, quote, Tiberius soon came to surpass all the young Romans of his age in discipline and courage. Indeed, he was the first to scale the enemy's wall, according to Fannius, who writes that he himself climbed up with Tiberius and shared in the exploit. Tiberius won the affections of many of his comrades while he was with the army and was greatly missed when he returned to Italy. End quote. And after that first taste of military exploits, Tiberius Gracchus returns to Rome and is elected quaestor, so again, moving up the ranks, the political ranks. And it's soon after that that he gets another, what we might call a commission, another set of orders to go and fight, again, as a military tribune in a foreign war, this time in Spain, the Numantine War, the Celtibrians. And this time his commander, his CO, is a guy called Mancinius. And we're told that Tiberius Gracchus distinguished himself once again, that, quote, courage and intelligence shone out of him all the more brightly. Seems like Tiberius Gracchus quite liked the military life. One of those people that accepted the danger and the risk. Instead of the fear and responsibility crushing you, it sort of elevates you to higher levels, sort of makes you perform even better than you otherwise would. All the accounts say that Tiberius, again, he shone as a military tribune. But his commander, Mancinius, is said to have been extremely unlucky. That he wasn't necessarily a terrible general, he obviously wasn't great, but he wasn't really, really terrible. And he didn't make loads and loads of absolutely ridiculous blunders, but he did find himself reversed by the Celtibrians and the Numantine armies. And he finds himself having to run away, basically losing a battle, or at least being bested on the field, and having to flee, having to order his whole army to sort of retreat in order to make sure they're not completely wiped out in a rout. But still, that's quite dishonourable. That's still a fail. That's still an L that he has to absorb there. And here's where there's an episode where Tiberius Gracchus first really properly distinguishes himself, where all of Rome would have got to hear of this sort of famous event that plays out next. The Numantine army wants to completely annihilate the Roman army. There's something like 20,000 Roman soldiers that have essentially capitulated. And Macinus sends word that he'd like to negotiate some sort of peace, some sort of treaty that allows his remaining 20,000 men to get out alive. And he just refuses to really treat with the Romans and Macinus at all, until they get word that the tribune Tiberius Gracchus is prepared to negotiate with them. And at that, the Numantines say, okay, we knew his father, we had a great amount of respect for the old Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, and we know this new kid. Everyone knows his character, his personality, that he's sort of beyond reproach, that he's good, that he's trustworthy, if nothing else. So, okay, all right, we'll open up negotiations if you send us Tiberius Gracchus. And so they do. And Tiberius Gracchus, we're told that in the negotiations, the Numantines sort of get some concessions out of him, but he gets some concessions out of them. And anyway, the long and short of it is that Tiberius Gracchus is able to negotiate for the release of about 20,000 Roman soldiers, that those men all get to go home and see their families again, rather than being butchered to a man. So that's sort of a great boon. You know, that's a real win, isn't it? Well, you would think so. When word gets back to Rome, all the hardliners, all the hawks in the Senate, they just view the whole episode as disgraceful. One, that Maecenas found himself pushed off the field of battle, and then that the Romans didn't fight to the last man, and that even Tiberius Gracchus, what he did, those negotiations, that wasn't a great win. It was sort of dishonourable in some ways. Well, you can look at it either way, couldn't you? But nonetheless, probably one of the most powerful men in Rome in terms of gravitas, autoritas, in terms of just authority, was still Scipio Aemilianus, who was a dear friend of Tiberius Gracchus. And he sort of stood up for him in the court of public opinion and said, no, look, come on. Okay, those guys over there in Spain may have dropped the ball by not just winning the battle in the first place. But come on, don't stain Tiberius Gracchus with negotiating to save 20,000 of our countrymen's lives. Come on, that isn't disgraceful. Come on, that was the right thing to do, surely. And so Tiberius Gracchus, it seems, sort of just about avoids his reputation being completely tarnished. And most people, in the end, agreed that he'd done a great thing.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.